This is our Space Force.
All right. Yes, Space Force indeed. We're blasting off, and we are live. Thanks everybody for joining us this evening on Facebook, YouTube, and beyond. My name is Mason Becker. I'm a candidate for State Assembly in the 33rd Assembly District, and tonight is a virtual town hall co-hosted by the Democratic Party of Walworth County. We'll be taking your questions throughout the next hour or so and taking your comments. We got a lot to talk about lately. There's a lot of things going on in the state and across the country. And of course, 2020 is the year where we're going to make change. So I'm joined by my friend Steve Doelder. Steve Doelder is the chair of the Democratic Party of Walworth County. And Steve, why don't you tell people a little bit about what you and the county party have going on right now and what we're going to be doing through the November election?
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's a real interesting time. For the first time in a long time, we have a candidate running for a county office. Carrie Varuda is running as a Democrat as the current Register of Deeds. So this is almost a historical thing. I don't think we've ever had a Democrat in a county office here in the history of Walworth County. So I mean, we're really supporting her. She's never run before. She was a former city clerk in Elkhorn, and Tony Evers appointed her to fill a position that was vacant. And now she was just appointed in March, and she has to run in November. And so she's kind of getting things together and really needs our help because this is an unusual activity. There will be no other Democrat on a local office. So when you're voting, you're going to have to go down and find her and vote for the only Democrat there. So, I mean, it's very important that we win that position and work for that. And I was telling Mason earlier, we have 6 assembly districts in Walworth County. And so we have 6 different races going on. And we also have 2 congressional races going on. And of course, then, the presidential race is also taking our attention. So we're busy. It's an unusual time. Every day is a new day. We don't know what to expect. We haven't been doing our usual door knocking and calling because of the quarantine. And so we have to come up with new ideas. And one of the things that we're planning are the use of billboards this year in this election. And so we're working on a fundraiser for that right now. That's our big focus, trying to get billboards across the county. So, we've been busy. We're having a meeting next week, Tuesday. It'll be virtual using Zoom. And we're having a guest speaker. Women for Biden will be speaking at our meeting. So you can join us. And again, just look for that announcement on our webpage. Okay. Thank you. I'll take you back.
All right, very exciting, and I'm glad that you guys have a Democrat on the county ballot this fall. It was the same way here in Jefferson County, where I'm from, for a long time. Sue Happ was the first Democrat to win in decades, and now she's being succeeded by a Democrat who's running unopposed this fall. So, but for those of you just tuning in, my name is Mason Becker. Some of you have probably already met me, or maybe you've been on one of my previous virtual town halls, but I want to talk a little bit about my background and why I'm running this year before we get into taking questions and comments from all of you. So I'm running in the 33rd Assembly District, which includes portions of Jefferson County, Waukesha County, and of course Walworth County, where we're talking about this evening. The portion of Walworth County that's in the 33rd Assembly District is basically the town of LaGrange and the town of Troy, along with a little sliver of East Troy. we are finding that as we get out and start to be able to talk to those people or reach them through Facebook and social media, we're getting a pretty good response because nobody has gone out and talked to residents in that part of the district in years, if ever. And I'm really excited. Hopefully, as COVID abates, that I'll be able to knock some doors and talk to some of those people in that area in person. But to give you all a little bit more of my background, I grew up in Fort Atkinson here in Jefferson County, lived here pretty much my entire life. Growing up in the 1980s, our household was very blue collar. My dad worked at Jones Dairy in Fort Atkinson, was a member of the UFCW local, and he was a leader during the 1982 historic strike at Jones Dairy. He later became involved with the AFL-CIO and worked for them for a time in Rock County as part of their worker retraining program. About 30 years ago, my parents, Tom and Coral, decided to enter the world of small business and got into the restaurant business with a little company called Subway. And after many decades of hard work, they currently own 13 locations in and around Jefferson County. About 5 years ago, I officially joined the family business, and it's been a really interesting experience, an eye-opener, not just to obviously how difficult being a business owner is, but just the fact that our state sure doesn't do a heck of a lot to help small businesses. Lately, our state's been about helping big corporate donors and multinational conglomerates like Foxconn. And one of the reasons I'm running is because we need to change that and get back to helping small businesses that are the building blocks of so many of our communities. I attended very nearby UW Whitewater. I graduated in 2002, and that's where I met my lovely wife, Laura. She is upstairs with our boys, Alexander and Cyrus. I think they're watching right now. So, hey, boys, hope you're being good. You know, they are fun. They keep our hands full, but I'm running because I want to make sure we leave a great state for the next generation. We will talk about a lot of different topics tonight, but I want to highlight a couple of the key reasons why I'm running. You know, I first ran for local office about 5 years ago. In the spring of 2015, I was elected to the Fort Atkinson City Council. At the time, our city council had developed a little bit of a reputation for taking too long to make basic decisions, and I wanted to help change that. And I've learned during my time on the council, I think that's really the model for what government should be. We don't worry about, you know, who's a Democrat or who's a Republican or what anyone's ideology or background is. We listen to our residents and we come together. We have discussions, and sometimes they do get heated, but at the end of the day, we vote and we try to come to the best possible consensus for local residents. I think too many members of our state government have become unaccountable to their constituents. They might pretend to listen, but they don't actually hear us. And I'm running because that needs a change. We're not going to have accountability from our legislators, though, until we get rid of gerrymandering and implement fair maps. And if there's no other reason I'm running, it's because voters should pick the representatives, not the other way around. If we want our government to be responsible again, we need fair maps and we need competitive elections. Couple other key reasons I'm running. I'm running in the only state assembly district that nearly had a public school district dissolve over in Palmyra Eagle. Would have been the first time in decades that happened in our state. And the incumbent I'm running against did basically nothing to help. I thought that was shameful, and I believe we need to get back to properly funding education in this state. One other issue I'm going to talk about, and this sometimes shocks people to hear me talking as a local city council president and as somebody who's running as a Democrat, but I believe that, yes, our property taxes are too high in this state. They're not too high because of greedy school districts or incompetent local governments. They're too high because the state forces us to fund almost everything through the property tax. this state's begging for comprehensive tax reform, and I hope to be a part of making that happen. So I don't want to talk too long here. I know we've got a lot of people who want to ask some questions, but I just want to say again, I've got two young boys upstairs. I want to make sure that we leave a great state for them to, if they want to, settle down, raise a family, just like my wife Laura and myself have been able to. But to have a great state to live, work, and play in, it takes more than slogans about being open for business or ads targeted to millennials living in Chicago. Yes, they did try that. We need to reinvest in the things that are going to make this state great. So I'm going to need your help. I hope I already have your support if you're tuning in. If not, I hope to win it in this virtual town hall tonight. And I just want to make sure that in November we win and we return to results here in Wisconsin. So, Steve, why don't you take it away? And what questions do we have here?
Okay, what's the first thing you would try to accomplish as a member of the assembly? You're elected, January comes along. What would be the first thing you would want to try to, and hopefully we would have a majority and you would be in the majority and everything would be wonderful. What would be your first goal?
Everything would be wonderful, and we're going to fight like heck to make that dream come true in November. I think things are trending very well for us and our allies, but let's just say that I only had to pick one or two. Easy question because I just talked about it. We absolutely have to implement fair maps. I support, going to something like the Iowa model, which they've been using for years, and it works. If you look at their map, it makes a whole heck of a lot more sense than our map does. But beyond that, beyond getting rid of gerrymandering, I think priority number one is probably healthcare. Everybody in the state deserves access to quality, affordable healthcare. We have too many people worried about, if they can pay for that prescription and if that's going to prevent them from paying their rent. As a small business owner, I'm somebody who doesn't get employer-provided health insurance. Like I know many of you are in the same situation. And I can tell you from experience, going on the marketplace and having to purchase your own insurance, the monthly premiums alone can be bad, but the co-pays and deductibles can be absolutely crippling. And in 2020, when we've seen the public health crisis with the coronavirus pandemic, we shouldn't have any resident in the state worried about going to their doctor because they don't know if they can afford that bill they're going to get at the end of the month. So we need affordable healthcare. And I think one of the easy ways to help make that happen is take the federal Medicaid expansion. That's a common sense thing we can do now. It would return taxpayer dollars to our state, and it would help people, especially lower income residents, get that health insurance and healthcare coverage they so desperately need. So those would be my top two. There's a lot more, but I'm sure we can talk about those more later. What else do we have, Steve?
Okay, just a follow up on that. One of the things that's different this year than when we redraw the maps is we actually do have a governor that will be Democratic. And how do you envision this to play out, even if we don't get a majority of Democrats controlling? What will happen, to the whole process? Obviously, Governor Evers could veto any plan coming out of the legislature. Is that true? Give us a little breakdown of the process that you envision. The two having a majority, not having a majority in the legislature.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems like the most likely scenario. The most likely scenario that's going to play out. The assembly will drop their version of a rigged map that will favor the majority Republican Party as much as possible. Tony Evers could look at that and veto that, and then it would end up in the courts. And we know if it would get to the state Supreme Court, the conservatives currently have a majority, in the state Supreme Court. The other really important thing in this election is that Robin Vos is only 3 assembly seats away from picking up a veto-proof majority in this state. So if they're able to win 3 more seats in November, even if Governor Evers were to veto their rigged maps, they could turn around and override the veto, which is, of course, a very scary scenario. So it's very important that people get behind a campaign like mine, which is in an area that I absolutely believe is trending from red to purple to at least light blue, because we need to compete all over the map this year to take away power from Robin Vos, who we already know isn't interested in listening to us as constituents, and preventing a veto-proof majority in the legislature.
Okay, well, thank you. That kind of gives us a roadmap of possibilities for us. Do you support legalization of marijuana? Is the next question.
Yeah, a great question, and one that continues to come up more and more. So before I answer it, a fun fact about me: I have never smoked a single joint in my entire life, and I don't judge people who have or who currently use it, but just something I never got into. It never interested me. That said, I absolutely support the legalization, regulation, and taxation of marijuana. First of all, there's no reason why the state legislature today shouldn't legalize medical marijuana. That's something a vast majority of residents throughout the state support. The government shouldn't be getting in the way between doctors and their patients. If a doctor thinks that some form of cannabis could help, for example, alleviate a patient's pain or chronic health conditions, they should be able to prescribe that. And furthermore, we can absolutely move towards legalizing marijuana for those who are 21 or older. We can regulate it and we can tax it, just like our neighbors to the south in Illinois have done. Currently, our residents are driving south of the state line. They're providing millions in sales tax revenue to the state of Illinois for them to spend on their needs. And they're also going through their toll roads and helping fund their infrastructure. It's just an absolute ludicrous system. And by the way, also legalizing marijuana will help alleviate a lot of the racial disparity and injustice in our criminal justice system today. So it's not just a healthcare issue. It's not just a revenue issue. It's also a justice and systemic racial division issue as well too. So absolutely, I support legalizing, regulating, and taxing.
Okay, thank you. Bringing up the racial justice question, George Floyd basically has been in the news, obviously, and what happened to him has raised a lot of questions. And one of the things that is happening across the state is examining some of the techniques that police forces use. A matter of fact, there's a bill in the state assembly now called Bill 1012, which is supported by the governor and the lieutenant governor, and would, create some kind of standard force standards for law enforcement, and bringing much needed accountability and transparency around policing, and protects whistleblowers, etc. What do you feel about that piece of legislation, that specific piece of legislation that has been introduced in our state legislature?
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say that our Constitution is supposed to guarantee equal protection under the law, and I'm guessing, Steve, I'll speak for myself at least, personally speaking, I don't have to have the fear if I get pulled over by a police officer for speeding, what might happen to me. I know that at worst, I'll probably get a fine and I can pay it, and I might have to go to court, but ultimately I can move on with my life. thousands of Black residents and brown residents in the state of Wisconsin don't have that same assurance and guarantee. They have to worry about what happens if they get pulled over. They have to worry about what happens if they get into an altercation at a business, what the end result might be. They might have to worry about racial profiling and racial discrimination. And I stand with those people. So I absolutely support Assembly Bill 1012 that the governor and lieutenant governor, like you said, are supporting and endorsing. All police departments, let's make one thing clear, in the state of Wisconsin do already have use of force standards. They are required by law to have those on the books. However, I think this is an appropriate time to go and and get the music going, but we really need to take a look at those use of force standards again, and we should be engaging with our residents of color now, bringing them to the table and asking them, do you think these standards in this community meet the criteria you'd be looking for so that you feel safe and equally protected under the law? And if not, we should figure out ways to increase those use of force standards so that we don't end up with tragic outcomes like what happened with George Floyd and have happened with so many other citizens of color throughout our nation. So I absolutely support that, and I think now's the time to have that conversation. Oh, Steve, you're muted. Don't feel bad. I've done it before too.
I think I'm okay, right?
Yeah.
Am I okay? Now. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Again, it's really nice to have a specific piece of legislation to focus on, so our citizens in Walworth County can look at that bill and ask, our favorite people to support that bill. It gives us something to focus on right now in light of all of the protests and action that people have been taking. So, well, thank you for your information and position on that. How can the state help lower monthly premium health insurance costs? Again, what's the process? Does the whole state legislature have to accept Medicare expansion, or is it just the governor? How does that work? If you said you would be in favor of doing that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the governor does not have the unilateral authority just to accept the federal Medicaid expansion money. It would have to pass through the legislature. And that's one of those issues where I just have to shake my head, because polls have shown again and again for the last few years that a majority of Wisconsin residents, they want us to accept the Medicaid expansion. They understand it's a return of their taxpayer dollars back to fund our communities and get affordable health care that people all across the state deserve. That's one thing we can do to help lower monthly insurance premiums. Obamacare was a first step, but we've seen how state governments like the one here in Wisconsin have done things to whittle away at the effectiveness of the Affordable Health Care Act. And we should have a state government that recognizes the importance of healthcare. Again, I think COVID-19 has shown that we don't live inside an economy. We live in a society made up of neighbors like you and me, and communities and workplaces. And if we don't have a government that values public health, the results, excuse me, I get fired up on this issue, Steve. The results, if our state government doesn't value the public health, are absolutely disastrous. So it's not just a healthcare issue. It's not just an expense issue. It's an economic issue, and it all ties together. At the end of the day, if people are paying less for their prescription drugs and their healthcare costs, it's better for the economy in general. It's just common sense. If you give people more money to spend in their pocket at the end of the month, it's going to be good for our small businesses and for our economy as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Just a little thought, your thoughts on if basically the Supreme Court rules against Obamacare, like again, the Republicans have pushed the whole issue into the Supreme Court. What do you think should happen in Wisconsin then, if you were elected in January and Obamacare is gone?
If Obamacare is gone, we should, as a state, move to address that as quickly as possible. I really hope that scenario doesn't play out, because we've seen very recently, if a court, whether it's at the state or the federal level, makes a quick decision without giving any kind of adjustment period, the results are chaos and confusion and disaster. We saw that with the state Supreme Court's ruling on COVID-19. And if the U.S. Supreme Court would make a similar ruling on Obamacare, I can only think the chaos would be equal. If that were to happen, our state would have to take responsibility. This is not something that your local city council or your county board would be able to address. It would be a statewide problem and would take statewide solutions, whether that's the state setting up some kind of insurance exchange on our own, or trying to implement some kind of statewide, Badger Care public option. That could be a way to do it. I just hope that doesn't happen. And that just shows that this November's election is so important, because our president is still working to do away with Obamacare.
Yep.
We need a president who's going to understand that everyone across the country deserves access to healthcare coverage and quality, affordable healthcare.
Okay. Speaking of COVID, how did the COVID pandemic affect your small business, and how did you deal with that? I mean, I imagine it did have some impact on your 13 subways in some respect.
It had a heck of an impact. I mean, you want to talk about a nightmare scenario where, once safer at home, was enacted, which it did need to be. It was the appropriate move at the time. Our business went downhill so quickly. We actually had to temporarily close 4 of our locations. We had to move some employees to other stores. Some of them kind of took voluntary layoffs. But for my part, I actually was laid off myself for a time. Even though I'm officially a Subway franchisee, I'm actually an employee of my parents' business, and they couldn't afford to pay me anymore for a time. So I was actually laid off for 3 weeks. Many residents had it much worse. I know there's people that are still laid off. I did something I never thought I would have to do, and there's no shame in it, but I applied for unemployment for the first time in my life. And let me tell you, people who think that's an easy process or just a quick one, they've never gone through it. The paperwork and headaches you deal with are very confusing. And then I waited weeks to receive any kind of unemployment money in return. I was lucky. My wife was able to continue working during that time. She was able to work from home, but it was basically chaos. And I think that just goes to show, the idea of healthcare, it's not just about giving people healthcare coverage, it's about helping businesses as well. If we let a public health crisis get out of control, it does and did hurt small businesses like the one I'm part of. We're fortunate now, we've been able to reopen those 4 locations, and we've been able to get all of our employees back to work. But that's something that never should have happened. It was a national healthcare crisis, and it should have had a better national response. And by that same token, this is still a statewide issue. We're still seeing incidences of COVID-19 spike up in some areas. We're seeing a slight uptick in Jefferson County, and I know in Walworth County, we've seen the same. I read last week, Portage County up north saw like an 85% increase in cases. This problem hasn't going away, and we need legislators in Madison who are going to take it seriously and not kick the can down the road or just kick it down as another unfunded mandate to local government.
Okay, well, thank you for that insight. I mean, it's a personal touch that you had to deal with. What's the most proud accomplishment on the Fort Atkinson City Council that you can think of?
There's a couple different things. When I first ran for city council in 2015, the streets in Fort Atkinson were absolutely horrible. Everyone knew that was the number one issue we were dealing with. When I came out of the council, I was actually part of a couple meetings with our designated legislators in Madison, and it quickly became apparent to me and the rest of our city council that help was not going to be coming from the state government. Our state representative and state senator were not going to go to bat for us to help get us any more revenue to address our crumbling streets. So we made a really tough decision. We did something that wasn't fun and we weren't excited to do, but we passed a local vehicle registration fee, aka a wheel tax, $20 per vehicle per year. And a lot of residents weren't happy about it, but guess what? They saw that, yes, we actually took that money and we put it all towards repairing our streets, and our streets got they got better sooner than later. So that extra revenue allowed us to get our streets caught back up to where they should have been. And we've been able to now take a more proactive approach toward maintenance. That was one instance that I'm very proud of. The other instance I'm proud of that ties into recent events, back about 3 years ago, it came to our attention that some residents of color in our community were facing racial harassment and discrimination. Because Fort Atkinson does have a small but growing minority population, particularly Hispanics. We looked at that issue, and we had a city council meeting where we got a lot of concerned resident comments, and they wanted us to take various actions. And one thing we were conscious of, we didn't want to do anything that would cause a hostile federal government to come back and hurt those people. But what we did do is we passed, I'll explain. Our police chief had, about a year before, implemented an unbiased policing policy that meant no matter your color or your background or where you were from, the police department was going to take an equal approach to engaging with you. For instance, if you had seen a crime that was reported or that sort of thing. During that city council meeting in 2017, we passed a public and unanimous endorsement of that unbiased policing policy. One of the few times we have gotten a standing ovation in the Fort Atkinson City Council chamber, but you know what? It was the right thing to do. It felt good to do it, and it made our residents of color feel much safer in our community because they knew that their local government had their back. And I hope that when I get to Madison, those people will know that, again, I still have your back, no matter where you're from, where your skin color is, your orientation, your religion. I'm going to have your back in Madison.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question deals with how are the Democrats going to win in November? And the question was addressed to both of us. So I'll let you start.
Oh, okay. I get to start this one.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
That's very generous of you, Steve.
Yeah, right.
How we're going to win in November is, for one thing, we're getting out, and granted, we can't do it in person right now, but we're doing it virtually even today. We're going to get out and talk to people that Democrats have sometimes taken for granted and ignored. We're going to talk to the rural residents in the 33rd Assembly District. We're going to talk to those people of color. We're going to talk to small business owners who sometimes have felt that the Democrats just wanted to be tax and spend and take them for granted. So we're going to get our message out by talking to people that sometimes we've taken for granted in the past. I'll say this from my campaign's end. I've been working on this campaign since this past fall. We publicly kicked it out in January, but we were working on the campaign for about 3 months prior. I've been fortunate. I've been able to put together a great team of people from throughout the 33rd Assembly District who are able to give me a lot of different perspectives and different ideas. We're going to get out, we're going to put out more yard signs, we're going to put out more lit, and we're going to do more digital marketing and advertising and messaging than we ever have before. And I think that's how Democrats win in November, because people look at the leadership in Madison and in Washington, and they know that this is not the way things should be in a democracy. This is not the kind of example we want to be setting for our kids. So if there's any year where we can affect positive change and overcome rigged maps and gerrymandering, this is our year to do it. But I just want to remind everybody who's listening and watching this, you need to get on board. You need to do more than just show up and vote on election day. You need to volunteer. You need to hopefully contribute to my campaign and the Walworth County Democrats. And you need to help us spread our message. So I talked about a lot. What's your take on it, Steve?
Well, I think one of the things that we have going for us is having such great candidates across the Walworth County. Again, we have, as I said, 6 different assembly races going on, and we also have 2 great congressional candidates, actually 3, with the 5th congressional district being in Whitewater. So we have all these campaigns that are coordinating and contributing, and as I said, we have Carrie running for a county office, which gives us a lot of incentive to really push out there. And one thing that we're trying new things. It forces us to look at, to try to figure out what we can do to make this thing work. And we've got our biggest asset, and that's Trump in the White House opening his mouth and talking. And every time he does, that we get calls and contributions and people wanting to do something to get rid of him. So I think, we have a lot going for us this year. And again, people call the office all the time and ask what they can do to help. And I think that's a real positive thing. So we look forward to a great campaign and, coordinating what we've been doing, what works well. One of the things, we're focusing on right now is the voter purge list, for instance, that we don't know exactly what the Supreme Court is going to do with that, if they're going to do anything. But we want to, at this point, kind of take a look at those people that have been labeled. There's something like 4,000 purged voters from Walworth County on that list. And, now that we have some voter data, we're going to kind of take a look at those right now and try to address that issue. So we got a lot of things going, and we have a lot of work to do. So, you can just join us. We have tons of different things that you can help us with.
Yep.
So,
Steve, let me just touch on one other thing real quick, but I know we have a lot of more great questions. You look at the results of the spring election, Jill Karofsky won the state Supreme Court race by 10 points. And I can speak to, in the 3 counties that make up the 33rd Assembly District, she made tremendous gains in all 3 counties over the last progressive candidate who ran. So if there's anything that you want to look at that gives me hope that we are going to win in November, and it is going to be a blue wave in the state, you look at the spring election. And by the way, people remember which party was responsible for making them go out and vote in the middle of a pandemic. Wasn't the party you or I are part of. So I'm glad to be on our side this year.
And I'll piggyback on that. One of the things that we, really kind of was surprised that Lisa Neubauer for the district court race won in Walworth County. So, I mean, not that she was a Democrat or a Republican, but she was the progressive candidate. And we actually won in Walworth County, which is just unbelievable. So, I mean, we've got a lot going for us. And we did increase Karofsky votes, two in Walworth County over Lisa Neubauer 2 years ago. So, there's a lot of positive things going on. So we just got to get our people out. Okay. The next question, like public schools, we there's a lot of talk of defunding. Well, we've defunded public schools for years now, and what would you do to fund our public schools and get away from this constant referenda that school districts have to pass each year to just fund our schools?
Yeah, we absolutely have to end the referendum cycle. It's not fair to our communities, and it's not fair to the kids who are in school. We had in the 33rd Assembly District I talked about earlier, the Palmyra Eagle School District. We had parents and kids who didn't know where they were going to be going next year because the situation was so up in the air, and a lot of these communities, they're blue collar and they're working class people, and they can't afford the high property taxes, and that's understandable. So that ultimately tells me we need to get over funding everything through just property taxes. It's not an efficient system. It's really archaic, basically, and most other states don't follow it. We all value our schools. We all want our kids to have a good education, but expecting communities to have to go to referendum every 2 or 3 years is not an efficient way to fund our public schools. So we need to find ways to reinvest in education. And really, to me, it just comes down to values. What do we value in the state? Is it about corporate tax cuts and helping out wealthy donors? Or is it about having strong communities and investing in the next generation? I personally feel it should be the latter. So let's get over the referendum cycle and let's come up with some new ways to fund our public schools.
Okay, thank you. What drove you to life in public service? What was the thing that drove you to run for alderman?
That's a great question. That's actually one I haven't really had come up yet, so I'm excited that this was asked. What drove me to public service? I talked about it briefly earlier, but I was always kind of a politically engaged person. I followed politics a little bit here and there. One thing that really woke me up, I'll admit, by the late 2000s, I kind of got a little bit disengaged. I got frustrated with government in general. And then, Scott Walker won the governorship in the 2010 election. And at first that didn't bother me because I wasn't worried about Scott Walker, but then he did, the self-described drop the bomb of Act 10. My wife, by the way, has made her career in public education. And at the time, she was a school counselor in the Delavan-Darien School District, which isn't in the 33rd Assembly District, but is very close by. And that for one, it hit our family's pocketbooks. And two, I can tell you, it demoralized people working in that district. People working in education don't deserve to be attacked. The state government should always have their backs, at least to some degree, because it's a tough job, and it's one that now has a high flameout rate because of Act 10 and other attacks on education. But what personally drove me to run for office for the first time, in like 2014 or so, our local city council was made up of some really good people, well-intentioned people, but they were taking too long to make some basic decisions. I won't get into all the details because it would take me all night to tell the story, but we had an issue with food trucks in our city. And I'm not against food trucks, by the way, even though I'm in the restaurant business, but it took them a year and a half to come to a resolution on this issue regarding questions about how these food trucks were operating in the city. And I just thought that took too long. And I knew as a small business owner, I couldn't take a year and a half to make a decision about, what products we were going to carry or what marketing we were going to do, or if I was going to hire somebody. That's not how things work for most of the rest of us. So I had people come up to me and tell me, because I started to get vocal about it a little bit in the community, and they told me, "Hey, Mason, you should run. You'd be someone different." And I was lucky that I had a few good people helping me and giving me advice. I worked my tail off. I knocked on a ton of doors. And like I said earlier, I was fortunate enough to be the top vote getter in that election. So I think ultimately it was just wanting to help government run better and more efficiently, along with helping local residents. That's what drove me to want to serve in public office.
Okay, good. That's a good insight into your motivation. I imagine that's why you're running for assembly also, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm running for assembly because this was my third go around where a lot of people asked me to run for state assembly, and they say third time's the charm. And at first I wasn't going to. I really didn't think I was going to run for a higher office in 2020. I thought if that day was going to come, it was going to maybe be in another 2 to 4 years or whatever. But I really looked at it, and I realized that if there was any year where we need to be the change that we want and do more than just talk about change, 2020 was the year to do it. I'll tell a story really quick. I've talked about my kids a little bit, but I remember that cold morning in November 2016, waking up after the night Donald Trump was elected. And I remember how that felt. And I never want to have that feeling again. And, our kids, our youngest Cyrus wasn't even born yet. My son Alexander was 5 years old at the time. And my wife and I, we had not really talked about the election in front of him. We just didn't. But kids pick up on things. They hear stuff at grandpa and grandma's or maybe on the schoolyard. And he knew about the presidential election. I remember a day or two after the election, he asked me, "Dad, why did the man who says bad words win?" And I didn't know what to say to him, and I still to this day honestly don't. And I never want to have that feeling again. And I think our government should lead by example. So I'm doing everything I can this year to make sure that on November 4th, we all wake up with a much better feeling than we did 4 years ago.
Yeah, like the feeling we woke up with in 2018 when we won all 5 state offices. I mean, that was the contrast was just unbelievable between those 2 times. And hopefully November 4th, we're going to wake up and we're going to have a lot of good feelings. And that's what I kind of hope for. Okay. Speaking of Governor Walker and what he did to our environment in Wisconsin and all the rollbacks. What do you think about those rollbacks on environmental protection, and what do you think you can do to correct those?
Yeah, I look at the environment as part of our state's heritage. Wisconsin has a great historic heritage of protecting our lakes, our rivers, our forests. We've historically had a tremendous state park system, and we gradually saw with the implementation of not providing state funding for state parks anymore, and chasing donor dollars by rolling back environmental protections, what that's done to our state. We now have some residents in parts of our state that can no longer drink their tap water because it's become too polluted. More than anything, and because I don't want to, we could go on all night about the environment, and it is an important issue. I think the rollbacks at the DNR have been one of the most concerning things that Governor Walker did during his time. We need to re-enable the DNR to, one, have proper funding, to two, to be able to listen to scientists and follow the data, rather than being prohibited from talking about climate change just because we don't like it from an ideological standpoint. We need to re-enable the DNR to follow the science, because we have a proud heritage in the state, whether you're talking about hunting or fishing. outdoor sporting activities. It's a huge part of not only our heritage, it's a huge part of our state's economy. The environment ties into tourism, which I think is the third biggest industry in the state. So we need to get back to following the science and allowing the DNR to do their jobs correctly.
Okay, good. Yeah, it is interesting because the impact of electing Democrats was felt in 2018. Sarah Galuski, the treasurer, is in charge of a lot of the public lands, investing in public forest, and her staff, when she came on, said, "Can we now talk about climate change?" Because they were under orders not to even use the words in any of their reports. And that real tiny change, was something that we got because we elected Democrats. And it makes a big difference. And, we can make a lot of difference by electing Democrats. A lot of farms are failing. Mason, how can we help them?
We can help them in a lot of different ways. I just think what's happened to our family farmers in this state is just appalling. I think last year, I'd have to go back and check, but I believe it was around we lost 800 family farms in this area alone. And it's just sad. To tell a story really quickly, my dad was actually one of 13 kids who grew up on a family farm right here in Jefferson County, down the road off Highway 106 in Cushman Mill. And my grandparents, even though they didn't have a lot of money, they were able to purchase that farm, raise 13 kids on it, and retire with dignity after many decades of hard work. And most family farmers today, they don't have that same outlook, unfortunately, for the most part. So what can we do to specifically help? First of all, we need to help them develop new markets for some of their products. I think there's a lot of opportunity just working with the Farm Bureau and the Farmers Union and other entities, find ways where we can find new products or new markets, I should say, for our farmers to sell their products. And we can help them develop new ones. The other thing we can do is we can work on our infrastructure. There's areas of the state where a farmer, they're trying to take their product to market or they're trying to get to their field, and they have to take a very roundabout way because that bridge down the road no longer supports the weight of their tractor because it hasn't been properly maintained for some time. So we need to invest in infrastructure. And I don't just mean streets by infrastructure, I mean internet. Rural broadband is sorely lacking throughout the entire state. My parents they're not farmers, but they live 3 minutes outside Fort Atkinson, and they can't get decent internet. And they're trying to run a business. I know how difficult it is. Farmers today trying to run their business, not having a reliable internet connection, that can be very harmful to their viability and survival. So we should invest in infrastructure. Should help them find new markets. And finally, unfortunately, there's still a mental health crisis among the farming community. We need to get serious about addressing mental health for our family farmers so that they can survive until the next generation.
Okay, good. It is interesting because the Rural Electrification Administration that came in, brought electricity to the rural areas, and we probably could develop a very similar program for internet across the state, especially rural areas, because then small businesses can also locate in these rural communities and really maybe help the local economy. So that's pretty good. Let's see, how would you work across the aisle to get things done in Madison? Since, we have two options. You're going to be in control, the Democrats, or you're going to be not in control. So how would you deal with those two scenarios?
Yeah, regardless of after November, which of those scenarios plays out, I want to be able to, work across the aisle and get back to bipartisanship in this state. Wisconsin used to have a tradition of open, clean, transparent, and accountable government. And as we got away from bipartisanship, I think part of that legacy went away as well. So how do you work across the aisle? First of all, you just go talk to people. You show respect and you sit down and talk to them and you build trust. And there's still opportunities for that even today in today's hyper divided state government. I know there's been some bipartisan cooperation in even trying to implement fair maps. There's actually some Republicans who have signed on to that. There's Republicans who have signed on to legalizing at least medical marijuana. So there are still so many opportunities to reach across the aisle because, again, being part of a local government and holding a local office, I think that's the model. Let's stop worrying about, well, I'm only going to work with the people from my team, or this guy is he has a good idea, but he happens to be a member of the other party, so I'm not going to talk to him. We need to get away from that mentality if we're going to succeed as a state. So let's get back to the bipartisan cooperation and let's get back to actually talking to each other rather than name calling and finger pointing.
Okay.
I think at this point, Steve will start to wrap things up. Okay. It's been a tremendous hour, and I really love that the Democratic Party of Walworth County was able to host this event with me tonight. This was a lot of fun.
Yep, I agree, and I think one of the things that we need and to do is urge people to get their mail-in ballot ordered now, and to make sure that they're able to vote and get an absentee ballot in time. You can do that very easily online by going to myvote.wi.gov, and you can order the ballots for the next 2 elections. They will mail them to you, and we'll give you the postage to mail them back, complete it. So we urge people to do that now, because who knows what's going to happen on November 3rd, and we want every Democrat to vote.
Yeah, absolutely. Just great, awesome points, Steve. You hit the nail on the head. We don't know how the rest of the coronavirus pandemic is going to play out. So we can't even be sure if there will be in-person voting on November 3rd. So please do sign up now to get your absentee ballot so you make sure that your vote counts on November 3rd. But again, I want to say thank you for the Democratic Party of Walworth County and for all of you for joining me. And I just want to say this election, it's more than about winning or losing. It's more than making sure Trump is a one-term president, which supporting my campaign can help do that. But what it's really about is values. What kind of state do we want this to be for kids like mine and yours? What kind of values do we want to pass on to the next generation? Do we want the divide and conquer politics to kind of continue on, or do we want to find a new, better way of doing things? Do we want to have another decade of gerrymandered rigged maps, or do we want to fight to overcome that and implement nonpartisan redistricting? Finally, do we want representatives who are going to just listen to their donors and the corporate lobbyists, or are they actually going to sit down and not only listen to, but actually hear what their constituents are saying? I am running because I believe in all of those things. And I hope I have your support, and I hope you get your vote in on November 3rd, whether it's voting absentee or otherwise. I need your support. It's no secret, this is a tough district that I'm running in. It is gerrymandered, but I think that if there's any year for change, 2020 is the year where we can fight back and we can overcome the obstacles and make sure we do have that blue wave in November. More than just your vote, I need you to hopefully go to beckerforassembly.com. I need you to volunteer if you're able to. There's ways you can do that, even with COVID-19. We still are looking for people who can make phone calls, who can send out texts, who can help us share stuff on Facebook. We need all that. And hopefully down the line, maybe you can sign up to help knock on doors and do things like that. I also need you to donate to my campaign. It's going to take money to win in a district like this, and it takes money to get your message out, whether it's on social media or otherwise. I need you to invest. My opponent, he's going to get help from that alphabet soup of conservative PACs and political organizations. I don't have that, and I've said this before, and people are probably sick of this joke, but I keep hearing about this George Soros guy, and I guess have gone lost in the mail because I haven't gotten one yet. So
yeah, we didn't get a check either, Mason. I'm very disappointed.
So I don't feel so bad, but people think that there's this entity giving checks like that to Democratic candidates in state assembly races, and there's not. So I need people like you to step up. If you can give $10, $50, $100, whatever you're possibly able to give right now, I need your help because I need individual donors like you, and it's people like you that are going to propel us to victory in November so that we can return to results here in the state of Wisconsin. So again, Steve, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for co-hosting this. Go check out the Democratic Party of Walworth County. Please check out my website as well. And I am looking forward to November 3rd. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And you all have a great evening.
Thank you all.